This is the Conscious Economics Podcast. Your co-hosts are two women who found themselves in careers on Bay Street, but decided that there was something missing. So here we are. I'm Rhiannon Roseland. I'm your co-host and the CEO of the Economic Club of Canada. I'm also the co-founder of Conscious Economics.
Hi, I'm Asil, the CEO of Conscious Economics and a financial therapist.
Now, we call ourselves economic healers, and that is a term that I'm sure nobody has heard before, but we really believe that if we want to heal our systems and create a more equitable society, it starts with actually healing our relationship with money and the economy.
When you join us on this podcast, you'll be exposed to courageous conversations that help us examine, heal, and redefine the relationship we have with money. Join us on this journey as we co-create the new economy together.
Hello and welcome to the Conscious Economics Podcast. I am Rhiannon.
And I'm Asil, and we're here to talk to you today about the She-Cession. And if you don't know what that is, don't worry. I didn't either until I started hearing Rhiannon talk about it across different media channels with our team. And then I realized this issue is huge. And how come I didn't hear about it before?
Yes.
So Rhiannon, what is the She-Cession?
Yeah, so I am going to break it down for you. So as we know, we have been through a really, really strenuous time during this global pandemic. And of course, a recession is what we typically think about when we think about major issues like this, a global pandemic, a global virus. But this She-Cession term was coined because the impacts, the economic impacts of this particular recession have hit women far harder than they have hit men. And traditionally, when we think about a recession typically impacts men. And so this is a really, really interesting thing to explore. It's not something that's happened before to have a She-Cession, a recession that has a predominant impact on women. And so we're going to break that down and talk about it. So when we think about this particular She-Cession, one of the things that we can sort of understand is that this downturn in our economy had many, many different aspects that aren't typical of a regular recession. So first and foremost, it impacted schools. It impacted kids going to schools. Normally speaking, in a regular recession, of course, major industries are impacted, usually bankers and people at the top and, in commodities and trading and the stock market, but it's never really trickling down into our public education system. So of course, this had a huge impact on women, and the industries that were hardest hit because of the nature of this recession being the pandemic were industries where women are dominant. So when we think of the service industry, when we think of retail, when we think of culture and tourism, when we think of sport and recreation, all of these areas were the areas that were hardest hit because these are the areas where we have to be physically in person doing these transactions, going to the store, getting our nails done, getting our hair done, the restaurant industry, and women are dominant in all of these across the board. We also saw a massive uptake of women leaving the labor force, so choosing to leave the labor force because they had to care for children at home, because they had so many responsibilities that they were trying to juggle. And what's really interesting is that at this point, or one point in April, we actually saw that women were at the lowest level of participation in the labor force than they had been within the last 30 years.
That's actually very scary if I really want to sit with that statistically, because that would create a value shift in the workplace as well.
Yeah. And so that's a lot of the rhetoric. It's like, wow, we've done so much. We fought so hard to get women to the place that they, are, and there's still so much further to go. And now it's like we're
regressing.
It feels like a regression. It feels like an evaporation of some of that work. And so it's really, I think, still not getting the kind of attention that it deserves. But today I want to talk about some interesting aspects that are living underneath the data and the statistics. So I'd love to kind of bring those up, and then I want to get your opinion on what you think.
Of course you are, because we like to get deep. So let's get into it, because we don't get the gist of things when we look at data peripherally.
Yes.
I don't know how to say that word.
I won't be able to say it either, so I'm not going to try. But what I'd really like to kind of break down here is when we saw women obviously leaving the workforce during the pandemic, and some of it was because they were laid off, they lost their jobs. And some of it was because they actually chose to leave during this time. And of the women who were let go, terminated, there were many that didn't choose to come back. And so we want to kind of talk a little bit about what's running deeper under this. What were those women doing? Why did they choose not to go back? And I can say, as a business owner and an entrepreneur myself and a mother of two who is impacted, of course, my industry, the live events industry, really hard hit, and then having to try and figure everything out while homeschooling two young children, very, very, very difficult. And one of the things that I really started to zero in on is, what really makes sense for my life anymore? Like, looking back before the pandemic at the way I was living and the pace at which I was living and all I was trying to cram in, and just realizing that it doesn't work for me. It doesn't work for my body. It doesn't work for my nervous system. It doesn't work for my family. And so a lot of women had this moment, this great reckoning where they started to realize that what was working for us wasn't really working for us to begin with. And so many women choosing to take that pause and sort of reevaluate where they want to be. And I don't know if this is something that we're going to see, a lasting trend toward. Obviously, as things open back up and as these industries start to recover again, the hope is that women will just follow suit and that they'll be back at it. But I have this inkling, this feeling that we are about to see lasting, huge, historic changes in terms of women within the labor force.
Wow. Well, it's very interesting you said that, because I recently was having a conversation with one of my best friends about her different career choices at the moment. She's at a time in her career that she can easily make the transition into senior management and be mentored and primed into what that path can look like. Groomed, absolutely. Or she could really start, exit the workforce and start her own business. And she's trying to evaluate the pros and the cons of both. And just as a SEAL, I looked at what being in senior management would look like, about what that executive trajectory would look like. And I don't want that life. Yeah. I don't want that life, because this girl kite surfs and she does more hobbies than I can possibly count right now. She dances, she goes on hikes, she travels the world. She has such an active lifestyle that I can't possibly see her being in the office for 80 hours a week. And sometimes the expectation is, as you transition into these senior management roles and leadership roles, this work-life balance disappears. So if you really have a lifestyle that you're passionate about, add kids to that mix, then how the hell are we going to juggle?
Well, and that's a big part of it. So I think also what's happening here is the traditional corporate infrastructure hasn't really been working for women ever, I would almost argue.
Yeah.
And there was this expectation, the more senior you got, the more you had to pretend that you didn't have to get to that soccer game or baseball game, that you didn't have, all of these other things that were pulling at your time. It was about how well can you walk in there and act like you're just like everyone else and you don't have any of these other obligations and responsibilities. And I will say that for all genders and identities, this structure is kind of crumbling right now. Men feel that pressure too. Men feel like they can't be the ones to say that they have to exit to go to their kids', soccer game or whatever else. But the expectation on women is just far more severe. And so I think a lot of women that were going through, we all were, let's face it, we were all going through this reckoning moment where we were sort of forced into our homes, away from everything that we knew, all the traditional ways that we would operate. And we really had to sit with ourselves and look around what's working, what's not. For me, I'll admit that in the first months of the pandemic, I felt like I couldn't handle being a mother. I felt like I couldn't handle being with my kids full time like that. Like I needed an escape. And I had to sit with that and be like, why can I not even handle being here with my own children? Now, I know I had other pressures and stress of the business, but the truth is that I'm not used to being with them that much because I'm used to saying goodbye to them in the morning, them going to school, having all of this energy. And I'm used to having these little slots with them where, after work, you come home, you have the dinner, and it's all in this sort of mechanical, methodical pattern. And so what's happened to me over the course of this is I had to kind of break apart this conditioning within me, really learn where I actually sat on the spectrum in terms of how well I really am, how balanced things actually are. And I'm an entrepreneur, so I create the condition for myself. I'm not within a corporate infrastructure. But what came out of it in the end is like, I love spending time with my kids so much more than I ever have because I actually got the moment to breathe and realize all that I was missing.
Yeah.
And I feel like the undercurrent to some of what's happening here is, of course, there's a disproportionate amount of pressure on women in the household still in terms of doing all of the household duties. But I think that there's been this moment of women's hearts opening up and realizing all that we're missing as well.
Oh my goodness. I'm getting chills.
This podcast is brought to you by our sponsor, RBC Investies. Backed by expert human advisors, RBC Investies is a smart, online, automated investment service that allows you to invest with low effort and low cost.
Open your first RBC Investies account and pay no management fees for your first year. Plus, start investing with as little as $100. Simply visit rbcinvesties.com/getinvesting and sign up using promo code AA407. As you know, I'm getting married soon, so the conversation around kids is something that is happening in my life as we speak. Like, do we want kids? How does that look like? In my early 20s, or actually my whole life, really, I never thought that would be a question I will ever ask, because I come from a culture where family is like one of the absolute basic foundational values across the culture. So it's almost like an unspoken expectation, an unspoken rule that you get married to have kids, and that's just part of life. You can't even question it. So I never grew up questioning it, but only in recent years I started looking at the economical pressures that we're under around the different socioeconomical factors that play a role in that decision, and I evaluated my dreams and career vision, and I started thinking, do I want kids? Is that going to take away from my ambition, or what does that look like? What does that balance look like? And I would continuously discuss this with my fiance, and I think it's very emotional to me to realize that this is not something I can just take for granted. Like, becoming a mother is not I remember being at work when I used to work in the corporate world and thinking to myself, I don't know how the mothers on my team do it.
Mm-hmm.
I just don't.
Mm-hmm.
I don't think I would have been able to do it in that space, because I valued way more quality time, and I personally was getting home drained, and I had no kids to cater to. So something had to give, and I'm not sure how people were.
And that's sort of the unrealistic expectation that's happened in the modern sort of Western economy, is that we are expected to do all this stuff, also without the collective community support that more typically would be seen in other parts of the world, where, you know, it really is a community raising children. So not only are we sort of isolated here in our, you know, I like to say like our little metal boxes, our condos and our homes, where we're isolated as, you know, mothers, and then we're also expected to take on just an unbelievable amount of pressure and work, all in the end in the name of productivity and profitability, and the human element of things is kind of lost. And that's why conscious economics really wants to reset the dialogue around people, planet, profit, art as being in balance and in harmony, because if people aren't well, how can our society be well? Mm-hmm. But if the women in the society are unwell, burnt out, exhausted, overstretched, overrun, then I argue that society is really not well.
Absolutely.
You know, and that's sort of the thing. There's two things that are happening. I think women feel like they have to give up certain parts of themselves in order to succeed in the current corporate infrastructure. But there's also a lot of children that are growing up with, you know, amazing, you know, two working parents, breadwinners. They may have all the material things, but they're missing some of the non-material things that you get with just being together, presence and time. And something that it really resonated with me, and it actually scared me, is I was working with a breathwork practitioner, and she said, love, the definition of love to her is unconditional presence. And I sat with that and I thought, well, then who am I loving? Because I am not unconditionally present. At the time, I thought about it and I thought, I am not unconditionally present with myself, my children, or my partner. And that is what this society has kind of robbed from us in so many ways. So I have my theories about the She-Cession, but one thing I really want to ask you, I remember you told me a story about a boss that you had who happened to be a woman who was in a very senior position, and we won't name the organization, but she warned you about something. So can you tell that story, and then we can get into how women sometimes are the barrier here even more than men are.
Yeah, this specific manager, she said remarks along the lines that there is no such thing as a work-life balance here. Like you are expected to put in the hours if you want to be a successful financial planner, because I was a financial planner. And she alluded to the fact, and she jokingly said, my in-laws raised my kids. Like she threw that comment as if it was a joke, and I was very appalled by it, frankly. And I just thought it was very, very inappropriate to even make that comment, but also super inappropriate to understand the underlying tones behind it. Like, am I really gonna create a lifestyle where I can't even be there for my own kids? I can't be there for my own self, and I'm just like this cog in the machine that I'm producing and making profit for the corporation, basically. And I was I cried that day because I was thinking about all these different things I wanted for my life and feeling stuck in a space where I'm looking around me and I'm like, I can't even afford making my own salad. And by afford, I'm talking like time wise. I felt always like, yeah, it was just a very stress time in my life, and I was still single at the time.
Well, and this is sort of the thing. So we see this happening more and more, that there's this generational divide in terms of expectation. So there's a generation of women who, I will tell you, came up through the ranks at a really difficult time. And I have to like hold space and honor those women that came through, that it was just such a challenging environment that women literally had to almost shed their femininity in order to go up the ranks. They almost had to play a role, literally even in the way that they dressed and they spoke, and they had no choice.
Absolutely.
And it was a very, very particular way. But since that time, society continues to evolve, become more progressive, become more conscious, ask deeper questions. And one of the questions that we've been asking as a society, as a body politic, is all around how do we get more women in senior leadership ranks? How do we get more women in the boardroom? And I will tell you, in speaking on behalf of, and I don't want to speak on behalf of my whole generation, but I identify as a millennial woman. And I know that many millennials and Gen Zs, we really have a different idea around what we want our lives to look like. We're really socially driven in terms of wanting to have meaning to our lives and purpose, as opposed to just having the plaque that said we worked at the same place for 45 years and we have a gold seal pension. We're looking for more, and we're looking for more in terms of what that leadership looks like. And we're looking for a space where, gender and identity isn't the piece that formulates who's where and what's what. And there are some gatekeepers, I'm going to call them in a really nice way, gatekeepers that are women that are of an older generation that sort of give the, like, I got to give you your medicine, young girl, like you got to pay your dues, and this isn't how it works. And typically, anecdotally, that feeling that women get from other women and the expectation that the women are holding on other women is what's driving many corporate women at mass out of the corporate labor force. Yeah. And they're not being driven out of the labor force. Like you mentioned with your friend, they're thinking and considering starting their own thing or working for a smaller SME. Yeah. Something that just gives a little bit more flexibility. So
there's really a lot of nuggets you're dropping here. And there's two things that come to mind that I would share. So the reason millennials have this specific thrive for meaning and purpose that is continuously being asked and integrated in their life is in 1989, and I found that recently, it's the year I was born, that was the first time in history where the generationally people who are over 40 exceeded the number of people under 40. So what that means is, as a society, the value shifted, because back in the days, people over 40 usually have a value shift in their life where they start asking these questions about purpose and meaning, and now like my actions have consequences and there's more to my life than just myself, so they do a lot of value shift and a lifestyle shift. But because this started happening, then it now trickled down to the generation that was being raised. So then we took these questions and values earlier on, and we were born with them. So this is why I was reflecting on that, because you were talking about women exiting the workforce, and I was wondering what kind of consequences this cultural shift is going to have on the workforce values. So and it's very interesting because my partner was asking me the other day, he said, what are some of the qualities that women are better than men in? Because he believes women are smarter and women are more capable, actually. And I was thinking about that question, and I thought these are very stereotypical boxes that we tend to like identify. These are female qualities, these are men qualities, but it's always important to remember that we both have the feminine and masculine energies within us, but it's more it is feminine qualities when you think about emotional intelligence, when you think about intuition, when you think about building relationships and all these different dimensions that go in that, when you think about compassion and tenderness and thoughtfulness. So I wonder what kind of workforce are we going to experience when women are exiting?
Well, and again, because the labor force and the workforce is a broad term, and we're looking right now, obviously, at a mass situation that's happened across the whole labor force due to the pandemic. But as we sort of come back into, our regular economy and our regular economic function, the question really becomes, will corporate Canada be able to change and transform its value system at a fast enough rate to not lose all of these incredible women that are there, and what needs to happen? And this is a question that I don't have all the answers to, but that I really want to put out to our community. How can we envision as a collective a more conscious economy where women and men and all genders and identities can thrive within these institutional organizations? What needs to happen? And a lot of it really comes down to some of the things you said, that emotional intelligence, that compassion, that creativity. I think all of us want to feel that we have those things in our lives. And sometimes what I'm seeing now is that in senior leadership, it's the men that are actually becoming a bit more progressive on some of these values. And it's some of these women that are acting as gatekeepers for other women to successfully kind of come in and embody those things. And we do see that the largest drop off with women leaving the Canadian labor force or corporate labor force is usually between those childbearing years. So anywhere between 28 and 40, where it's like, that's your pipeline for senior leadership. But that's also where we see the biggest drop off of women saying, I don't want to climb this ladder anymore. Or like, I'm too smart for this, or I'm too good for this. Like, I see my friend who's making great money doing her own thing, but also being able to have her lifestyle. So how can we ask of these major organizations to adopt a bit more balance? And I think it is possible, especially with technology, especially in the digital age. So I think one of the big questions, and I don't know where you sit on this, but one of the big questions that many companies are grappling with right now in regards to coming back through the pandemic is, will they stay a digital remote workforce, or will they enforce that employees have to be back in the office, 9 to 5, Monday to Friday? Where do you sit on that?
I suspect there's going to be a hybrid model. I think a lot of companies are starting to think about what that can look like. And I suspect that we are going to be leaning towards that, especially that we proved in the last year and a half that we are able to work from our homes. However, there's a lot of missed opportunity for true connection, for collaboration, for ease of certain procedures to take place when you are in the office. I personally would appreciate a hybrid model moving forward. I know we both would, and I know our staff as well at Conscious Economics would embrace that idea, because then you're giving people agency to take care of their time and their lifestyles and the needs they need to take care of, but also prioritize what are some of the tasks I would take care of when I'm in the office with people, and what are some of the tasks that I need my own space, my own time, and how can I structure my days accordingly, which will save a lot of commuting time, which will save a lot of I think a hybrid model is really cool if we can figure out what that would look like on a larger scale, because that's the challenge when you talk about corporations. It's the scaling, we're
it's so huge.
When you're like a 10 people team, things can work easily, but when you're like thousands of people, scaling that's where the challenge may be.
Absolutely.
But we have a lot to learn as we go, and we also have the Heart Project, which is advancing women in leadership, coming around, which we definitely want to talk more about as we continue.
Yes.
But we do encourage you to visit our website at consciouseconomics.ca to learn some of the programs we have, because when we ask these questions, we're not just stopping there. We create programs and different initiatives to help us get the answers we crave. Like, these answers are ultimately ways in which we can translate to impactful actions to create the transformation we want to see. So that's our invitation for you for this podcast.
Absolutely. So thank you so much for everyone for tuning in. The She-Cession is real. The she-covery is something that we want to focus on, and we want to know what is going to be the answer in terms of building a more conscious economy that really works for women. So thanks for tuning in, and we hope to catch you again next week on the Conscious Economics podcast.
Take care.
This podcast is brought to you by CPP Investments. At CPP Investments, they never lose sight of the long term. They invest the Canadian Pension Plan Fund to help provide financial security for generations of Canadians.
They diversify the CPP fund across geographies and asset classes to access the best investment opportunities and generate sustainable long-term returns. The fund is now more than $400 billion.
To learn more about their investment performance for Canadians, visit cppinvestments.com.